The winter of 1888 didn't just arrive in Wyoming territory. It attacked. Snow fell in sheets so thick you couldn't see your own hand stretched in front of your face. Wind tore across the plains like something alive and furious, ripping shutters off cabins, snapping fence posts clean in half, burying entire herds of cattle under drifts that wouldn't melt until April. It was the kind of cold that killed animals standing upright, froze water inside wells, turned human breath into ice crystals before it left your mouth. And in a sagging homestead at the far edge of Blackstone Ridge, a woman named Clara Whitmore sat alone in the dark, listening to the walls groan under the weight of snow piled on the roof. She was 27 years old. She looked 50. 3 years earlier, Clara had crossed half the country in a covered wagon with her husband Owen, both of them young and stupid and burning with the kind of hope that only exists before the world breaks you. They'd believed in manifest destiny, believed in land ownership, believed that hard work and determination could turn wilderness into a future worth living. The frontier had other ideas. Owen Whitmore died in October of 1887, somewhere up in the Medicine Bow Mountains during an early snowstorm. He'd ridden out alone to track down cattle that had wandered off from their grazing land. His horse came back 3 days later, reins dragging through mud, saddle empty. They never found Owen's body. Clara searched for 2 weeks straight, wandering through timber and ravines until her feet bled through her boots. She called his name until her voice gave out. She checked every hollow, every frozen creek bed, every animal den she could find. Nothing. The other settlers told her Owen probably fell off a cliff, or got mauled by a bear, or froze to death after breaking a leg where nobody could hear him scream. They said she should accept it and move on. They said grief was a luxury the frontier couldn't afford. So Clara did what women on the edge of nowhere always did. She buried her hope where nobody could see it and kept working. She tried to manage the cattle alone. She tried to repair fences by herself. She tried to harvest enough hay to last through winter, to fix the irrigation channels, to patch the cabin roof, to split firewood, to maintain equipment, to butcher animals, to preserve meat. But a 100-acre homestead wasn't designed for one person, and Clara wasn't built for the kind of isolation that turns days into months without hearing another human voice. By December, the neighboring ranchers stopped visiting. At first, they'd brought food after Owen disappeared: cornbread, dried venison, jars of preserves. They'd offered condolences and practical advice. But as the weeks passed and Clara's situation didn't improve, their sympathy curdled into something uglier, pity mixed with fear. Because in the West, weakness was contagious. A failing homestead reminded every other settler how thin the line was between survival and death. Clara's collapsing fences and dying cattle became proof that the frontier could destroy anyone, and people hated being reminded of that. So they avoided her. They stopped waving when they rode past her property. They talked about her at Sunday gatherings in town like she was already dead. That Whitmore widow won't last another season. Shame about Owen, but she should sell the land before she loses everything. Woman's got no business trying to run a ranch alone. Probably lose her mind out there before spring. Clara heard the whispers, even when nobody was talking. By Christmas week of 1888, her pantry held 3 pounds of cornmeal, a bag of dried beans that tasted like dirt, and half a jar of rancid lard. Her firewood pile had shrunk to a few pieces of half-rotted timber. Wolves circled the property every night, bold enough now to come within 20 yards of the cabin, their eyes reflecting moonlight like scattered coins. The roof leaked in 4 places. The stove barely produced heat. Her last 2 cattle died during a blizzard when the barn door blew open and she couldn't get to them in time. But the worst part wasn't the hunger or the cold or the fear. It was the silence. No footsteps on the porch, no voice calling her name, no reason to wake up in the morning. Clara had stopped talking to herself weeks ago because hearing her own voice made the loneliness worse. She moved through the cabin like a ghost haunting her own life, eating without tasting, sleeping without dreaming, surviving without living. On Christmas Eve, she made a decision. At sunrise, she would pack whatever could fit in a single bag, abandon the homestead, and walk to the nearest town. She'd leave Owen's grave behind, unmarked, unvisited, just another piece of frontier mythology swallowed by wilderness. She didn't know where she'd go after that. Maybe back east to families she hadn't spoken to in years. Maybe to one of the mining towns where women could find work cooking or cleaning. Maybe nowhere. Maybe she'd just walk into the snow, and let the cold take her the same way it took Owen. Clara sat by the dying stove that night, wrapped in a quilt that smelled like smoke and mildew, watching shadows flicker across the walls. Outside, the wind screamed. Snow pelted the windows. The whole world felt like it was trying to erase her. She closed her eyes. She waited for morning, and then 3 slow knocks on the door. Not frantic, not desperate, certain. Like whoever stood outside knew she was home and wasn't leaving until she answered. Clara's heart kicked against her ribs. Men alone in the wilderness at night meant danger. Everyone knew that. Drifters, outlaws, drunks looking for shelter. None of those encounters ended well for women living alone. She reached for Owen's revolver, kept loaded on the table beside her chair. The metal was cold against her palm. 3 more knocks. Slower this time. Patient. Clara stood, legs shaking, and moved toward the door with the gun raised. Her voice came out hoarse from disuse. "Who's there?" No answer, just wind. "I'm armed," Clara said louder. "You've got 10 seconds to state your business or I start shooting through the door." A man's voice came through the wood, rough and tired. "Ma'am, I mean no harm. Name's Wade Mercer. My horse threw a shoe 2 miles back and this storm's getting worse. I'm asking for shelter until it passes." Clara pressed her ear against the door. His voice didn't sound drunk, didn't sound panicked or aggressive. But that didn't mean anything. Plenty of men could lie with a calm voice. "There's a town 6 miles east," Clara said. "You can make it if you ride slow." "No, ma'am, I can't. Not in this weather. And my horse is injured." "That's not my problem." Silence. Then the man spoke again, quieter. "You're right. It's not. But I'm asking anyway." Clara stood frozen, gun still raised, heart hammering. Every instinct screamed at her to send him away. But another part of her, the part that remembered being human before grief turned her into stone, recognized something in his voice. Exhaustion. Not the tiredness that comes from a long ride. The exhaustion that comes from carrying too much for too long. She knew that feeling. Against every ounce of common sense, Clara unlocked the door and pulled it open 6 inches, keeping the gun visible. The man standing on her porch was a mountain. Easily 6'3", broad-shouldered, wearing a long duster coat crusted with ice and snow. His hat was pulled low, but she could see a weathered face, maybe 40 years old, with a dark beard and eyes that looked like they'd forgotten how to rest. Behind him stood a black stallion, breathing hard, one front leg held at an awkward angle. Wade Mercer didn't move. He just stood there in the storm, snow piling on his shoulders, waiting for her decision. Clara studied him for a long moment. Then she stepped aside. "Stable's around back," she said. "You can bring the horse in, but the gun stays with me, and you sleep on the floor." "Understood?" Wade nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." He led the stallion toward the barn without another word. Clara watched him disappear into the blizzard, then shut the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. She'd just let a stranger into her home in the middle of the night during the worst storm of the year. Owen would have called her reckless. Maybe she was. Or maybe she was just too tired to care about dying anymore. Wade Mercer returned 20 minutes later, stamping snow off his boots before stepping inside. He moved carefully, like a man used to being around skittish animals. No sudden gestures, no loud noises. Clara gestured to the far corner of the cabin with the barrel of the revolver. "You can sit there. Don't touch anything." Wade lowered himself onto the floor, back against the wall, and pulled off his gloves. His hands were scarred, old burns, cuts that had healed badly, fingers that had been broken and reset crooked. Working hands. Claire stayed in her chair across the room, gun resting on her lap, watching him. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The wind howled, the stove ticked, snow hissed against the windows. Finally, Wade broke the silence. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for letting me in." Clara didn't respond. Wade nodded like he understood and pulled his coat tighter around himself. More silence. Clara stared at him, trying to figure out if she'd made a terrible mistake. But Wade didn't look like a threat. He looked like a man who'd been riding too long through bad weather and just wanted to stop moving. After another stretch of quiet, Clara heard her own voice, rusty and strange. "There's water in the bucket by the stove. No food." Wade glanced at the bucket, then back at her. "I've got dried meat in my pack. I can share if you want." Clara's stomach clenched at the mention of food, but she kept her expression flat. "I don't need charity. Wade studied her for a moment, then reached slowly into his coat. Clara's hand tightened on the gun, but he just pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth and set it on the floor between them. "Not charity," Wade said. "Payment for the shelter." He leaned back against the wall and closed his eyes, clearly exhausted. Clara stared at the bundle. Her pride told her to refuse it. Her hunger told her to shut up. She waited until Wade's breathing deepened into something close to sleep, then reached forward and grabbed the cloth package. Inside was dried venison, hard biscuits, and a strip of salted pork. Clara ate slowly, forcing herself not to devour everything at once, tears burning behind her eyes because it had been so long since food tasted like anything other than survival. When she finished, she wrapped the rest carefully and set it aside. Then she sat back in her chair, gun still in her lap, and watched the stranger sleep while the storm tried to tear the world apart outside. Tick. Wade Mercer stayed through the storm. One day became two became four. The blizzard didn't let up. It got worse. Snow piled so high against the cabin walls that Clara couldn't open the front door. Drifts buried the fences completely. The temperature dropped so low that water froze inside the cabin despite the stove burning constantly. They were trapped. At first, Clara barely spoke. She moved around Wade like he was a piece of furniture, keeping the revolver close, sleeping in her chair instead of her bed. But Wade didn't push. He just worked. On the second day, he noticed the shutters rattling loose and spent 3 hours outside in sub-zero wind, nailing them back into place with wood scraps from the barn. On the third day, he patched the roof leaks using tar and canvas from his saddle pack, climbing up through knee-deep snow like it was nothing. On the fourth day, he chopped enough firewood to last 2 weeks, stacking it inside the cabin so it could dry. He never asked permission, never expected thanks, just moved through the work like a man who understood that survival didn't care about pride. Clara watched him, confused and suspicious. Men didn't help for free. Not out here. There was always a price. But Wade never asked for anything. He slept on the floor in his coat. He ate less than his share of the food. He didn't stare at her the way some men did, like she was property waiting to be claimed. On the fifth night, trapped inside by another brutal wind, they finally started talking. Wade had boiled water for coffee using grounds from his pack. Real coffee, the kind Clara hadn't tasted in months. The smell alone made her dizzy. He poured her a cup without asking and handed it across the table. Clara wrapped her frozen fingers around the tin mug and breathed in the steam. "Why are you really here?" she asked. Wade settled into the chair across from her, the first time he'd sat anywhere other than the floor. "I told you, my horse—" "Your horse was fine," Clara interrupted. "I checked him this morning. No limp, no swelling. That shoe wasn't thrown. It was loose. You could have ridden 6 more miles easy." Wade's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. Respect, maybe, or recognition. "You're right," he said finally. Clara waited. Wade stared into his coffee cup like he could read the future in the grounds. "I own a ranch north of here," he said. "Big operation. Couple thousand head of cattle. 30 men working the property." Clara's eyebrows rose. "So why are you out here alone in a blizzard?" Wade's jaw tightened. "Because I couldn't stand being there anymore." The admission hung between them like something fragile. Clara understood that feeling. She didn't press. After a long silence, Wade continued. 10 years ago, my brother and I built that ranch from nothing. We fought off rustlers, survived droughts, outlasted every bad season the territory threw at us. We were going to split the land 50-50 when we'd saved enough to expand." He paused. 3 years ago, a land war broke out between the big ranchers and the homesteaders. Armed men on both sides. People getting killed over water rights and grazing boundaries. My brother Samuel tried to stay neutral. He just wanted to raise cattle and live quiet. Wade's knuckles whitened around his cup. Raiders attacked our ranch one night, burned half the herd. Samuel rode out to stop them. Clara already knew how the story ended. "They shot him off his horse," Wade said, voice flat. "Left him in the dirt to bleed out while they scattered the rest of the cattle." "I'm sorry," Clara whispered. Wade shook his head. "After that, I stopped caring about anything except the ranch. I worked 18-hour days, hired more men, bought more land, turned the whole place into something that could never be destroyed again." He looked up at Clara. "But I forgot how to live there. It stopped being a home and started being a prison I built myself." Clara knew exactly what he meant. This cabin had become the same thing for her. So I left, Wade continued. Told my foreman I needed a few days away. Started riding with no destination. And then that storm hit, and I saw smoke from your chimney. He met her eyes. I knocked on your door because I was tired of being alone. The honesty in his voice cracked something open in Clara's chest, something she'd kept sealed shut for over a year. My husband died in the mountains, she heard herself say, 16 months ago. I've been trying to run this place by myself ever since. Wade nodded slowly, like he already knew. That's why you answered the door with a gun. That's why I'm still alive, Clara corrected. The corner of Wade's mouth twitched, almost a smile. They sat in silence after that, drinking coffee while the storm raged. And for the first time since Owen died, Clara didn't feel like she was drowning in the quiet. Look, the storm finally broke on the 7th day. Clara woke to sunlight, actual sunlight, pouring through the windows like something holy. The wind had stopped. The world outside looked buried under 10 feet of snow, but the sky was clear and blue and infinite. Wade was already awake, standing by the window, staring out at the frozen valley. I should go, he said without turning around. Clara felt an unexpected stab of panic. 7 days ago, she'd wanted nothing more than to be alone again. Now, the thought of silence returning felt unbearable. You don't have to, she said quietly. Wade turned to look at her. Clara stood, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. The snow's too deep to travel safely. Your horse needs more rest, and there's work to do here if you're willing. Wade studied her face for a long moment. What kind of work? Clara gestured toward the window. Those fences need rebuilding before spring. The barn roof's half collapsed. I've got equipment that hasn't been maintained in over a year, and if I'm going to survive past February, I need to figure out how to make this place productive again. That's a lot of work for one person, Wade said carefully. I know. Wade crossed his arms, leaning against the wall. What are you really asking me, Clara? Clara met his eyes. I'm asking if you meant what you said, about being tired of being alone. Something shifted in Wade's expression. Surprise, maybe, or recognition. He looked at her like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. I meant it, he said. Clara nodded. Then stay. Wade was quiet for a moment. Then he said, All right. Over the next 3 weeks, the homestead transformed. Wade worked like a man possessed, rebuilding fences, reinforcing the barn, repairing irrigation channels, clearing snow from critical pathways. He moved through hard labor with the efficiency of someone who'd spent his whole life fixing things that were broken. Clara worked beside him. At first, she tried to match his pace out of pride, but Wade stopped her on the 3rd day. This isn't a competition, he said, not unkindly. You don't have to prove anything. Clara bristled. I'm not. Yes, you are. Wade set down his hammer. You've been fighting alone for so long, you forgot how to let someone help. The words hit harder than Clara expected. She wanted to argue, but he was right. So instead of pushing back, she asked, What should I do? Wade thought for a moment. You're good with numbers? Better than most. Then handle the planning. Figure out what supplies we need, what can be salvaged, what needs replacing. Make a list of priorities. I'll handle the physical work. It made sense, but it also meant trusting someone else to carry the weight she'd been shouldering alone. Clara wasn't sure she knew how to do that anymore. Still, she tried. She started organizing the homestead like a business, cataloging resources, calculating costs, mapping out repairs in order of urgency. It felt strange at first, using her mind instead of her body, but the work steadied her in ways she hadn't expected. And slowly, the dynamic between her and Wade shifted. They fell into a rhythm. Wade would ask questions. Where do you want this fence line? How deep should the irrigation ditch be? And Clara would answer with precision and confidence. She stopped second-guessing herself. He stopped treating her like she might break. They worked as partners. And at night, they talked. Not about Owen or Samuel at first, just small things. Wade told stories about cattle drives, the kind of ridiculous chaos that happens when you're moving 1,000 animals across open wilderness. Stampedes triggered by lightning, rivers that rose too fast, cowboys who got drunk and fell off their horses into cactus patches. Clara laughed for the first time in over a year. The sound startled her. Wade smiled when he heard it. A real smile, not just politeness. You should do that more often, he said. Do what? Laugh. Clara looked down at her hands, suddenly self-conscious. Hasn't been much to laugh about. I know, Wade said quietly, but that doesn't mean you have to forget how. Clara didn't know what to say to that, so she changed the subject. Tell me about your ranch. Wade leaned back in his chair, firelight catching in his eyes. It's big, bigger than I ever thought it would be. We've got grazing land stretching 15 miles in every direction, good water sources, strong herd. Sounds successful. It is. But you left. Wade's expression darkened. Success doesn't mean much when you're the only one there to see it. Clara understood that more than she wanted to admit. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Then Wade asked, What did you and Owen want to build here? Clara's throat tightened. Nobody had asked her that in a long time. We wanted a family, she said finally. Not a big ranch, just enough land to raise cattle, grow food, maybe have children someday. Simple dream. Impossible dream, Clara corrected bitterly. Wade shook his head. Not impossible, just harder than you expected. Clara looked at him. You sound like you still believe in that kind of thing. I want to, Wade admitted. I just don't know how anymore. Clara felt something twist in her chest. Two broken people, two different kinds of loneliness, both trying to remember what hope felt like. But trouble was already coming. On a cold afternoon in late January, 3 riders appeared on the horizon, moving slowly toward the homestead. Clara saw them first. She was outside hanging laundry, actual laundry, because Wade had repaired the water pump, when she spotted the figures cutting across the snow-covered valley. Her stomach dropped. Wade! He emerged from the barn, saw her expression, and followed her gaze. The riders were still half a mile out, but moving with purpose. Wade's hand went to the revolver on his hip, an instinct. You recognize them? He asked. Clara squinted. One of the horses looked familiar. I think that's Hale's men. Wade's expression hardened. Victor Hale? You know him? Everyone knows him, Wade said grimly. He's been buying up land all over the territory. The riders drew closer. Clara's pulse hammered. Wade moved to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. Let me do the talking, he said quietly. The 3 men reined up 15 yards from the cabin, close enough to be intimidating, far enough to avoid immediate conflict. The leader was a thin man with a weasel face and expensive clothes that looked out of place in the wilderness. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Afternoon, ma'am, he said, tipping his hat to Clara. My name's Garrett. I work for Mr. Victor Hale. Clara didn't respond. Garrett's smile tightened. Mr. Hale sent me to discuss a business proposition regarding your property. I'm not selling, Clara said flatly. Garrett chuckled like she'd made a joke. Ma'am, with all due respect, you don't have much choice. This homestead's been in decline for over a year. You've got debts with the Territorial Land Office, unpaid taxes, failed crops. That's none of your business. It became my business when Mr. Hale started acquiring adjacent properties. Garrett pulled a folded paper from his coat. He's offering you $300 for the land and structures. That's more than fair considering the condition of the place. Clara's jaw clenched. $300 was an insult. The land alone was worth 5 times that. I said I'm not selling. Garrett's expression cooled. Mrs. Whitmore, I don't think you understand your situation. Winter's barely half over. You've got no cattle, no crops, and no way to make payments. If you don't sell now, you'll lose everything anyway. Wade stepped forward. The lady said no. Garrett's eyes shifted to Wade, taking in his size, his stance, the gun on his hip. And who might you be? Someone telling you to leave. The 2 riders behind Garrett tensed, hands drifting toward their weapons. The air went electric. For a moment, Clara thought violence was about to explode right there in the snow, but Garrett raised a hand, stopping his men. No need for trouble, he said smoothly. We're just delivering a message. He turned back to Clara. Mr. Hale's a patient man, but his patience has limits. You've got 1 week to reconsider. After that, things get more complicated. He didn't elaborate on what complicated meant. He didn't have to. Garrett wheeled his horse around, and the 3 riders disappeared back across the valley. Clara stood frozen, heart pounding, fists clenched so tight her nails bit into her palms. Wade watched them go until they were out of sight. Then he turned to Clara. You know what Hale does to people who refuse him? Clara nodded stiffly. Everyone knew. Victor Hale was one of the wealthiest men in the territory, a land baron who'd built his empire through intimidation, legal manipulation, and violence when necessary. Settlers who refused to sell found their livestock poisoned, their barns burned, their families threatened. Most folded under the pressure. The ones who didn't usually disappeared. Wade studied Clara's face. You could sell, he said carefully. Take the money and start over somewhere else. Clara turned to look at him, eyes blazing. This is my home. Owen's buried somewhere in those mountains. I'm not walking away. Wade nodded slowly. Then you're going to need help. I can't afford... I'm not talking about money, Wade interrupted. I'm talking about standing your ground. Hale's not going to back off just because you said no. Clara's throat tightened. Why would you do that? Risk yourself for land that isn't even yours. Wade looked at her for a long moment. Because I'm tired of watching powerful men destroy people who can't fight back. Something fierce and grateful surged through Clara's chest. Then I guess we're in this together. Wade's mouth curved into a grim smile. I guess we are. Neither of them knew it yet, but that decision, that single moment of defiance, had just ignited a war that would consume the entire valley. And nothing would ever be the same again. The week that followed felt like waiting for an executioner's blade to fall. Clara couldn't sleep. Every sound outside the cabin made her reach for the revolver, wind rattling shutters, branches scraping against walls, her own heartbeat hammering loud enough to wake the dead. She'd lie awake in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, imagining Hale's men surrounding the property with torches, imagining flames climbing the walls while she burned alive inside. Wade noticed. He didn't say anything at first, just started taking watch shifts at night, sitting by the window with his rifle across his lap while Clara tried and failed to rest. But on the third night, when he found her pacing the floor at 2 a.m, he finally spoke. You're going to collapse if you keep this up. Clara wrapped her arms around herself, cold despite the fire burning in the stove. I can't stop thinking about what they'll do. Wade set his rifle down and stood, moving to block her pacing route. Look at me. Clara stopped, meeting his eyes. Hale wants you scared, Wade said. Fear makes people sloppy, makes them give up before the fight even starts. Don't hand him that victory. I'm not giving up, Clara said sharply. I know, but you're wearing yourself down, and that's almost as bad. Clara wanted to argue, but exhaustion had stripped away her ability to lie. I don't know how to do this, she admitted, voice cracking. I don't know how to fight someone like Victor Hale. He has money, men, connections. What do I have? A failing homestead and a stranger who showed up in a blizzard. The words came out harsher than she meant. Wade didn't flinch. You have something Hale doesn't, he said quietly. What's that? A reason to fight that isn't about power. Clara stared at him. Wade's expression was serious, almost gentle. Hale's building an empire because he wants control. You're defending a home because you refuse to let the frontier erase you. That difference matters. Clara felt something tight in her chest loosen just slightly. You really believe that? I do. Clara looked down at her hands, scarred from work and cold. Owen used to say the same thing, that the frontier couldn't break people who refused to be broken. Smart man. Dead man, Clara corrected bitterly. Wade was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Dying doesn't mean he was wrong. Clara's throat burned with unshed tears. She nodded once, not trusting her voice. Wade moved back to his chair by the window, picking up his rifle. Get some sleep, Clara. I'll keep watch. This time, she didn't argue. She lay down on her bed, still fully dressed, boots still on, and closed her eyes. And for the first time in 3 days, she slept. When Clara woke 6 hours later, pale sunlight was streaming through the windows and Wade was gone. Panic spiked through her chest before she heard sounds coming from outside. The rhythmic thunk of an axe splitting wood. She pulled on her coat and stepped onto the porch. Wade was in the yard, working through a pile of timber he'd dragged from the tree line. Sweat soaked through his shirt despite the freezing temperature. He moved with mechanical efficiency, driving the axe down again and again, splitting logs like he was trying to split the world in half. Clara watched him for a moment, then called out, "You've been at that for hours." Wade didn't stop. "Needed firewood." "We have firewood." "Now we have more." Clara descended the porch steps, boots crunching through snow. "Wade, stop!" He buried the axe in the chopping block and turned to face her, breathing hard. Clara studied his face, jaw tight, eyes shadowed, tension coiled through his entire body. "You can't sleep either," she said. It wasn't a question. Wade wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "I keep thinking about Samuel." Clara went still. Wade stared past her, gaze distant. "The night the raiders came, I was in town buying supplies. By the time I got back, the ranch was on fire and Samuel was dead in the dirt. I told myself if I'd been there, I could have stopped it, could have saved him." "You don't know that." "Doesn't matter, I wasn't there." Wade's voice turned harsh. "I left him alone, and he died because of it." Clara stepped closer. "What happened to your brother wasn't your fault. I know that up here," Wade tapped his temple, "but I don't know it here." He pressed a fist against his chest. Clara understood that feeling too well. "Is that why you stayed?" she asked quietly. "Because you didn't want to leave someone alone again?" Wade met her eyes. "Maybe. Or maybe I stayed because I finally found someone who understands what it's like to carry ghosts." The honesty in his voice made Clara's breath catch. She wanted to say something comforting, something wise, but words felt inadequate. So instead, she picked up a log and set it on the chopping block. "If you're going to keep splitting wood, I'll stack it." Wade's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Deal." They worked side by side in silence, the only sounds the axe falling and their breathing steaming in the cold air. And somehow, the shared quiet felt more honest than any conversation. 2 days before Hale's deadline expired, Wade rode into Blackstone Ridge to gather information. Clara wanted to go with him, but Wade refused. "If Hale's men are watching, it's better they see me alone. Makes them think you're isolated." "I am isolated," Clara pointed out. "No," Wade said, adjusting his saddle. "You're not." He left before she could argue. Clara spent the day cleaning weapons. Owen's rifle, the shotgun she'd inherited from her father, the revolver she kept loaded by her bed. She checked ammunition supplies, sharpened knives, prepared like she was getting ready for war, because she probably was. Wade returned after dark, his expression grim. "What did you find out?" Clara asked before he'd even dismounted. Wade tied his horse and came inside, shaking snow from his coat. "Talked to some of the other settlers. 3 families have sold to Hale in the past month. 2 more are close to giving in." Clara's stomach sank. "Why? What's he doing to them?" Wade poured himself coffee from the pot Clara had kept warm. Different tactics for different people. One family had their well poisoned, another lost half their livestock to mystery illness. The Johnsons had their barn collapse in the middle of the night. Someone sawed through the support beams. "And nobody stops him?" "Who's going to stop him?" Wade asked. "The sheriff's on Hale's payroll. The territorial judge plays cards with him every Thursday. Most of the big ranchers either work with Hale or stay out of his way." Clara sat down heavily at the table. "So we're alone?" Wade shook his head. "Not exactly. I talked to a few settlers who haven't sold yet. The Mitchells, the Hendersons, Old Man Briggs, they're all in the same position you are. Barely hanging on, but too stubborn to quit." "What good does that do us?" Wade leaned against the counter, considering. "Separately, you're all easy targets. Together, you're harder to break." Clara looked at him sharply. "You're talking about organizing people." "I'm talking about not dying alone." Clara's mind raced. The idea made sense. Strength in numbers, shared resources, mutual defense. But convincing desperate people to fight instead of flee wouldn't be easy. "They won't listen to me," Clara said. "I'm barely surviving myself. Why would they trust my leadership?" "Because you haven't given up yet," Wade said. "That counts for something out here." Clara wanted to believe him, but belief felt dangerous. "When does Hale's deadline expire?" she asked instead. Wade glanced at the window where darkness pressed against the glass like something alive. "Tomorrow at noon." Clara's pulse kicked. "What happens if we ignore it?" Wade's expression darkened. Then Hale stops asking politely. They spent the rest of the evening preparing. Wade checked the perimeter, reinforced door barricades, positioned extra ammunition within reach of windows and doorways. Clara cooked what little food they had left, beans, cornbread, the last of Wade's dried meat, trying to keep her hands busy so her mind wouldn't spiral into panic. When night fell, they sat on opposite sides of the table, weapons within arm's reach, waiting. The hours crawled past. Midnight came and went. 1 o'clock. 2. Clara found herself watching Wade across the table. The way firelight caught in his dark eyes, the tension in his jaw, the scars on his hands. "Can I ask you something?" she said suddenly. Wade looked up. "Go ahead." "Why haven't you gone back to your ranch? You've been here almost 3 weeks. Don't your men need you?" Wade was quiet for a long moment. "My foreman's good. He can handle things." "That's not an answer." Wade's mouth twitched. "No, it's not." Clara waited. Finally, Wade spoke. "I told you I left because I couldn't stand being there anymore. That was true. But it wasn't the whole truth." He stared into his coffee cup. "For 3 years after Samuel died, I convinced myself that building the ranch bigger and stronger would honor his memory, that success would somehow make his death mean something." "Did it?" Wade shook his head. "It just made me rich and miserable. I had everything I thought I wanted, and none of it mattered because I'd forgotten how to feel anything except anger and guilt." Clara understood that too well. "So what changed?" Wade looked at her. "I knocked on your door." The words hung in the air between them. Clara's heart did something complicated in her chest. "Wade, I'm not saying this to make you uncomfortable," Wade interrupted. "I'm saying it because you asked an honest question, and you deserve an honest answer." He leaned forward. "Being here, working with you, fighting for something that isn't about money or revenge, it's the first time in years I've felt like a person instead of a machine." Clara didn't know what to say. Her throat felt tight. Wade stood, picking up his rifle. "You should get some rest. I'll take first watch." He moved toward the window before Clara could respond. She sat alone at the table, pulse racing, mind spinning. Everything was about to explode into violence. Hale's deadline would expire in hours. And somehow, in the middle of all that chaos, she'd started feeling something for the stranger who'd appeared in a blizzard and refused to leave. The realization terrified her almost as much as Victor Hale did. Dawn arrived cold and gray. Clara woke to Wade shaking her shoulder gently. "They're here." She bolted upright, grabbing the revolver from beside her bed. "How many?" "6 riders, maybe more waiting out of sight." Clara pulled on her boots and coat, heart hammering. She joined Wade at the window. 6 men sat on horseback about 50 yards from the cabin, arranged in a loose semicircle. Garrett was among them, along with 2 men Clara recognized from town, hired guns who worked for whoever paid best. One of them was holding a torch. Wade's jaw clenched. "They're not here to negotiate." Clara's hands trembled as she checked her revolver. The riders waited, unmoving, for what felt like an eternity. Then Garrett called out, voice carrying across the frozen valley. "Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Hale would like to speak with you." Clara moved toward the door, but Wade grabbed her arm. "Don't go out there." "He said he wants to talk." "He's lying," Wade said flatly. "The second you step outside, they'll shoot you and claim you attacked first." Clara stared at him. "How do you know?" "Because that's how men like Hale operate. I've seen it before." Clara's stomach twisted. She moved back to the window and called out, "Tell Hale I'm not selling." Garrett turned his horse, speaking to someone behind him. A moment later, the line of riders parted. A 7th man rode forward, tall, gray-haired, dressed in expensive clothes that looked absurd in the wilderness. His face was weathered but aristocratic, the face of someone who'd spent his life giving orders and watching other people obey. Victor Hale himself. Clara had never seen him up close before. He looked exactly like she'd imagined, powerful, cruel, completely certain of his own authority. Hale reined his horse to a stop beside Garrett and surveyed the homestead with obvious disdain. "Mrs. Whitmore," he called out, "I apologize for the early visit, but we have business to conclude." "I told your man I'm not interested," Clara shouted back. Hale smiled, a cold, empty expression. "I'm afraid that's no longer an option. You see, your property sits directly in the path of a railroad spur line my associates are building. The territorial government has already approved the project, which means your land will be acquired one way or another." Clara's blood went cold. That's a lie. No one's building a railroad through here. Not yet, Hale agreed. But they will be in approximately 6 months. And when that happens, this valley will be worth 10 times what it is now. Clara understood. Hale wasn't just buying land to expand his ranch. He was buying up property before the railroad arrived, planning to resell it for massive profit once the transportation line made the region valuable. You're stealing from people, Clara said. Hale shrugged. I prefer to think of it as investing with foresight. Now I'm offering you one final chance. $500 for the land and structures. That's more than generous considering the circumstances. The circumstances being that you're threatening to kill me if I refuse? Hale's smile widened. I would never threaten a lady, but I can't control what happens in the wilderness. Accidents occur, fires start, people disappear. Wade appeared beside Clara at the window, rifle raised. Hale's eyes shifted to him, assessing. And who might you be? Someone telling you to leave, Wade said, voice deadly calm. Hale studied Wade for a long moment, then laughed. Wade Mercer. I heard you'd abandon your ranch to play hero. How disappointing. Wade's finger tightened on the trigger. You've got 10 seconds to get off this property. Hale's expression hardened. You're making a mistake, Mercer. I know your reputation. You're a businessman, not a gunfighter. And the widow here has nothing worth dying for. That's not your decision to make, Wade said. Hale stared at them both, calculation flickering behind his eyes. Then he turned his horse. Very well. I'll give you one more day to reconsider. But understand this. If you refuse my offer again, I will take this land by force. And when I do, neither of you will leave here alive. He gestured to his men. The riders turned and began moving back across the valley, slow and deliberate, making their threat clear. All except one. The man with the torch remained behind. He smiled, a vicious, eager expression, and threw the torch toward the cabin. It landed in the snow 10 feet from the porch, sputtering but not going out. Then the rider spurred his horse and galloped after the others. Clara and Wade stood frozen, staring at the burning torch. The message was obvious. Next time, it wouldn't land in the snow. Wade lowered his rifle slowly, jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. We need help, he said. We can't fight them alone. Clara nodded, pulse still hammering. The other settlers you mentioned. Can we reach them before Hale moves again? Wade thought for a moment. Maybe, if we ride hard and split up. Then let's go. They spent the next hour preparing. Wade saddled both horses while Clara packed supplies, ammunition, food, blankets, everything they might need if things went bad quickly. Her hands shook as she worked, adrenaline making her clumsy. Wade noticed. He caught her wrist gently as she fumbled with a rope tie. Clara, look at me. She met his eyes. We're going to survive this, Wade said. You don't know that. No, but I choose to believe it anyway. Clara wanted to believe him. She tried to find that faith somewhere inside herself. The faith Owen used to carry so easily. The faith that kept people moving forward even when the world tried to crush them. I'm scared, she admitted. Good, Wade said. Fear keeps you sharp. Just don't let it stop you from moving. He released her wrist. Clara finished tying the rope with steadier hands. They left the homestead just after noon, riding in opposite directions. Wade headed north toward the Mitchells' property. Clara rode east toward the Henderson Ranch. The valley looked deceptively peaceful. Snow-covered fields, distant mountains, pale winter sky. But Clara felt eyes watching from every ridge, every tree line. She pushed her horse faster. The Henderson Ranch sat 5 miles away, tucked into a shallow valley beside a frozen creek. As Clara approached, she saw smoke rising from the chimney and felt a surge of relief. At least they were still here. She reined up in the yard and called out, "Hello, the house!" A moment later, the door cracked open. A rifle barrel appeared first, then a woman's face, middle-aged, worn, suspicious. Who are you? My name's Clara Whitmore. I own the homestead west of Blackstone Ridge. Recognition flickered in the woman's eyes. The widow. Clara swallowed the bitterness that word always brought. Yes, I need to talk to you about Victor Hale. The woman's expression darkened. We already sold. Clara's stomach dropped. When? 3 days ago, the woman's voice cracked. We didn't have a choice. He burned our hay stores, poisoned our well. My husband's sick. He needs medicine we can't afford. Clara felt everything collapsing. I'm sorry, she said quietly. The woman's eyes filled with tears. We leave next week. Going back east to my sister's place in Ohio. Never should have come out here in the first place. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to convince her to stay and fight. But looking at the woman's defeated expression, she knew it was pointless. I understand, Clara said. Good luck. She turned her horse and rode away before the woman could respond. The next 3 stops went the same way. The Johnsons had sold and were already gone, cabin empty and cold. Old man Briggs had died 2 weeks earlier, heart attack, according to his neighbor, and his land had been seized for unpaid debts. The Mitchells' property was abandoned, windows dark, no smoke from the chimney. By the time Clara met Wade back at the homestead after nightfall, hope had curdled into something bitter and hard. Wade's expression told her he'd had similar luck. They dismounted in silence, neither wanting to speak first. Finally, Clara said, Everyone's gone, sold out or driven away. Wade nodded grimly. Same on my end. We're alone. Clara sat down heavily on the porch steps, exhaustion hitting her all at once. Wade sat beside her. They stared out at the dark valley, breath steaming in the frozen air. We should run, Clara said quietly. Take what we can carry and leave before Hale comes back. Is that what you want? Clara thought about Owen buried somewhere in those mountains. About 3 years of backbreaking work poured into this land. About every moment of suffering that had brought her to this exact point. No, she admitted, but I don't want to die either. Wade was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, offering his hand. Come with me. Clara took his hand, letting him pull her to her feet. Wade led her into the cabin and lit a lantern. Then he pulled out a piece of paper and started drawing. What are you doing? Clara asked. Making a plan. He sketched out the homestead layout, cabin, barn, fences, tree line, approach routes. Hale has numbers and firepower, but we have defensive position and knowledge of the terrain. If we're smart about it, we can make this place harder to take than he expects. Clara stared at the crude map. You're talking about a siege. I'm talking about not rolling over and dying. Wade looked up at her. I know the odds. I know what we're facing. But I also know that sometimes the only way to survive is to fight like you've got nothing left to lose. Clara felt something shift inside her chest. She'd spent 16 months drowning in grief and isolation, convinced the frontier had already killed her. But maybe she'd been wrong. Maybe survival wasn't about avoiding death. Maybe it was about deciding what you were willing to die for. Clara looked at Wade, this stranger who'd knocked on her door in a blizzard, and somehow become the only person standing between her and complete destruction. All right, she said. Let's make them bleed for it. Wade's mouth curved into a fierce smile. That's what I wanted to hear. They worked through the night, fortifying the homestead like soldiers preparing for battle. Wade reinforced the cabin walls with extra timber, created firing positions at windows, stockpiled ammunition in strategic locations. Clara dug shallow trenches for cover, scattered caltrops along likely approach routes, prepared supply caches they could access if they had to retreat. It was brutal, exhausting work. But it felt better than waiting helplessly for death. As dawn broke across the frozen valley, painting the snow orange and gold, Clara and Wade stood together in the yard, surveying their preparations. It wasn't much, but it was something. Clara loaded her revolver one more time, checking the chambers. Wade shouldered his rifle. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The message was clear in every look, every gesture, every moment of shared silence. If Victor Hale wanted this land, he'd have to take it over their bodies. And they weren't planning to die easy. The attack came 3 days later, just before dawn, when exhaustion made people careless. Clara heard them first, the muffled sound of horses moving through snow, trying to stay quiet and failing. She'd been half asleep in the chair by the window, rifle across her lap, when the noise jerked her fully awake. Wade! He was up instantly, moving from his position near the door to the window beside her. 8 riders this time, approaching from 2 directions. 4 from the north, 4 from the east, trying to surround the cabin. They moved slowly through the pre-dawn darkness, shadows against snow. They think we're asleep, Wade whispered. Clara's pulse hammered in her ears. The riders drew closer, 50 yards, 40, 30. Wade raised his rifle slowly, sighting down the barrel. Wait until they're committed, he breathed. Let them get close enough they can't retreat without exposing themselves. 20 yards. 15. Clara could see their faces now in the gray light. Hard men, hired guns, the kind who killed for money and slept fine afterward. 10 yards. One of them pulled out a torch. Now, Wade said. He fired. The crack of the rifle shattered the morning silence. The man with the torch jerked backward off his horse, torch spinning away into the snow. Clara fired half a second later, aiming for the rider on the far left. Her shot went wide, but close enough to make the man's horse rear in panic. Chaos erupted. The riders scattered, shouting, trying to control their panicked animals while returning fire. Bullets tore through the cabin walls, punched holes in the shutters, sent splinters flying like shrapnel. Clara ducked below the window, heart racing, and reloaded with shaking hands. Wade fired again, methodical and calm. Another rider went down, clutching his shoulder. The remaining men retreated, dragging their wounded with them, and disappeared back across the ridge. Silence fell like a hammer. Clara's ears rang from the gunfire. Smoke hung in the air, acrid and bitter. Wade lowered his rifle, breathing hard. "You all right?" Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. She'd just shot at another human being, missed, thank whatever forces governed the universe. But she'd tried. The realization made her stomach turn. Wade moved to check the other windows, scanning for movement. "They'll be back," he said. "That was just a probe, testing our defenses." Clara forced herself to breathe normally. "How long do we have?" "Hour, maybe 2. They need to regroup, treat their wounded, figure out a better strategy." Clara stood on shaking legs and moved to the water bucket, splashing her face. The cold helped clear her head. "We can't hold them off forever," she said. "No," Wade agreed, "but we don't have to. We just have to make it expensive enough they reconsider whether this land is worth the cost." Clara wanted to believe that, but she'd seen the look in Victor Hale's eyes. Men like him didn't reconsider. They escalated. The second attack came 2 hours later from a completely different direction. This time, they used fire. 3 riders approached from the west, moving fast, torches already lit. They threw them at the barn, the fences, the cabin itself, trying to burn everything at once. Wade and Clara fired from different windows, trying to drive them back, but the riders had learned from the first assault. They stayed low, kept moving, made themselves difficult targets. One torch landed on the barn roof. Flames caught in the dry wood, spreading fast. Clara's heart seized. "The barn!" "Let it burn," Wade said harshly. "We leave this position, we're dead." Clara watched helplessly as fire consumed the structure Owen had built with his own hands, wood collapsing in showers of sparks. Rage burned through her chest, hotter than the flames. She fired at the retreating riders, not caring anymore whether she hit them or missed, just needing to hurt something the way they were hurting her. One rider fell. She didn't know if she'd killed him or just wounded him. Didn't know if she cared. The riders disappeared again. The barn burned for 3 hours before collapsing completely, leaving nothing but charred timber and ash. Clara sat slumped against the wall, rifle hanging loose in her hands, staring at nothing. Wade crouched beside her. "Clara." She didn't respond. "Look at me." She turned her head slowly. Wade's face was smudged with gunpowder, eyes bloodshot from smoke and lack of sleep. "You still with me?" he asked quietly. Clara's throat felt raw. "They destroyed everything." "They destroyed a building," Wade corrected. "You're still alive, that's what matters." "For how long?" Clara's voice cracked. "They'll keep coming until we're dead or we give up. And I don't know how to do either of those things." Wade gripped her shoulder. "Then we change the game." Clara stared at him. "What does that mean?" Wade's expression turned calculating. "Hale's playing offense because he thinks we're trapped here. What if we weren't?" "You're talking about leaving. I'm talking about attacking." Clara's exhausted brain struggled to process the words. "Attacking what?" "We're 2 people against an army." Wade stood pacing. "Hale operates out of his ranch headquarters 20 miles north. That's where he keeps his records, his money, his hired guns. Everything that makes him powerful is concentrated in one place." "So?" Wade turned to face her. So if we hit him there, we prove he's vulnerable. We show every other settler in this territory that Victor Hale can be hurt. Clara pushed herself to her feet. That's insane. Even if we made it to his ranch, we'd be killed the second we got close. Maybe, Wade admitted. Or maybe we'd survive long enough to burn his records, steal his payroll, expose how he's been manipulating land deals. Clara shook her head. This isn't about justice anymore, Wade. This is about staying alive. No, Wade said sharply. This is about deciding whether we die here like trapped animals or die fighting back. I'd rather die on my feet heading toward him than on my knees waiting for him to finish us. Clara wanted to argue, but looking at the smoking ruins of her barn, at the bullet holes in her walls, at the life she'd tried so desperately to preserve now burning to ash, she realized Wade was right. They were going to die anyway. Might as well make it count. All right, Clara said. When do we leave? Wade's eyes gleamed. Tonight. While they think we're still trapped here. They spent the remaining daylight preparing. Wade sketched out what he remembered of Hale's ranch layout. The main house, the bunkhouse where hired guns slept, the office building where records were kept, guard positions, approach routes. Clara packed supplies, ammunition, food, matches, rope, everything they'd need for a suicide mission disguised as a plan. Neither spoke about the obvious fact that they probably wouldn't survive. Some things didn't need saying. As darkness fell, they ate a cold meal in silence, the last of their provisions, stale bread and dried meat that tasted like dust. Wade cleaned his rifle for the third time, methodical and precise. Clara checked her revolver, made sure her knife was sharp, tied her hair back with a strip of cloth. They looked at each other across the table. You know this is crazy, Clara said. Wade nodded. Completely. We're probably going to die. Most likely. Clara felt something like a smile tug at her mouth. Then I'm glad I'm not dying alone. Wade's expression softened. Me too. They left the cabin just after midnight, moving on foot through the darkness. Wade had insisted on leaving the horses. Too noisy, too easy to spot. Better to travel slow and quiet than fast and dead. The temperature had dropped brutally, turning their breath into clouds of ice crystals. Snow crunched under their boots, despite their best efforts to move silently. The moon hung fat and bright in a clear sky, turning the landscape into a black and white nightmare. They walked for hours. Clara's feet went numb inside her boots. Her lungs burned from breathing frozen air. But she kept moving, following Wade's broad back through the wilderness, trusting him to navigate terrain he'd only seen on maps. Around 3 a.m, Wade stopped suddenly. Clara nearly walked into him. What? Wade raised a hand, cutting her off. Then Clara heard it too. Voices. Male voices, rough and careless, drifting through the cold air. Wade signaled for Clara to follow and moved silently toward the sound. They crested a low ridge and looked down into a shallow valley. 4 men sat around a campfire, rifles propped against a fallen log, passing a bottle between them. Hale's men judging by their horses and equipment, guards posted to watch the northern approach to the ranch. Wade pulled Clara back below the ridge line. We have to go through them, he whispered. Clara's stomach twisted. Can we go around? Wade shook his head. Would add 3 hours to the trip. We'd hit the ranch in daylight, and we'd be exhausted. This is the only way. Clara looked at the 4 men, then at Wade. How do we do this? Wade's expression went cold and hard. Fast and quiet. No hesitation. Clara swallowed. She'd never killed anyone before. But tonight, she would. They circled around, approaching from downwind so the horses wouldn't smell them. Wade moved like a predator, every step deliberate and silent. Clara tried to match him, heart hammering so hard she was sure the men would hear it. They got within 20 feet before one of the guards stood, stretching. Wade didn't hesitate. He stepped out of the darkness and fired. The guard went down without a sound. The other 3 scrambled for their weapons, shouting, confused. Clara fired twice. Hands shaking, missing both times. Wade shot the second man, then the third. The 4th guard got his rifle up and aimed at Wade's chest. Clara fired without thinking. The bullet caught the man in the side, spinning him around. He fell, screaming. Wade crossed the distance in 3 strides and ended it. Silence returned, broken only by Clara's ragged breathing. She stared at the body of the man she'd shot, blood spreading black across the snow. Her hand shook so violently she nearly dropped the revolver. Wade appeared beside her. "Clara." She couldn't look away from the dead man. "Clara, look at me." She turned. Wade's face was grim but gentle. "You did what you had to do. If you hadn't fired, he would have killed me. You saved my life." Clara's voice came out broken. "I killed someone." "Yes." "I can't. I don't." Wade gripped both her shoulders. "Listen to me. You can fall apart later. Right now, we need to keep moving. Can you do that?" Clara forced herself to breathe. She nodded. Wade released her. They stripped the guards of ammunition and supplies, took their horses, and continued north. Clara tried not to think about the weight of the revolver at her hip, tried not to think about the man's face as he fell, tried not to think at all. Hale's ranch appeared just before dawn, a sprawling complex of buildings lit by lanterns, surrounded by fences and guard posts. Bigger than Clara expected, more intimidating. They left the horses tied in a grove of trees a quarter-mile out and approached on foot, staying low, using every bit of cover the terrain provided. Wade had been right about the layout. Main house in the center, bunkhouse to the east, office building to the west. Guards patrolled in pairs, but their routes were predictable, almost lazy. They thought they were safe here. That arrogance would cost them. Wade and Clara waited in the shadows until a pair of guards passed, then slipped through the fence line and pressed themselves against the back wall of the office building. Wade tried the door. Locked. He pulled out a thin piece of metal and worked the lock with practiced efficiency. The door clicked open. They slipped inside. The office was dark, filled with filing cabinets, desks, stacks of paperwork. Clara could smell ink and tobacco and wood polish. Wade lit a small lantern, keeping the flame low. "Find anything that looks like land deeds or financial records," he whispered. They worked quickly, pulling open drawers, rifling through papers. Clara found it 5 minutes later, a ledger book filled with transactions. Names, dates, purchase prices. The Hendersons had sold for $200. The Johnsons for $300. Old man Briggs's property had been seized for a debt of $150 he'd supposedly owed. Except Clara knew Briggs hadn't owed anyone anything. The debt was fabricated. And there, at the bottom of the page, Clara saw her own name. Whitmore property. Estimated value, $2,800. Purchase price offered, $300. She felt rage burn through her chest like acid. Hale had known exactly how much her land was worth, and he'd offered a tenth of that, counting on her desperation to force acceptance. "Clara," Wade hissed, "we need to go. Now!" Clara looked up. Wade was at the window, staring out into the yard. "They know we're here." Clara's blood went cold. She moved to the window. At least 20 men were gathering in the yard, carrying rifles and torches, moving toward the office building with clear purpose. They'd been discovered. Wade grabbed the ledger from Clara's hands and shoved it into his coat. "Back door, move!" They ran. Out the back into the darkness, guards shouting behind them. Gunfire erupted. Bullets tore through the air, punched into the walls beside them. They ran harder, lungs burning, legs screaming, made it to the fence line. Over it. Into the trees. The horses were still there, terrified by the gunfire, but still tied. Wade and Clara mounted in one fluid motion and kicked the animals into a gallop. Behind them, Hale's men were mounting up, torches turning the night orange. They had maybe a 30-second head start. Not enough. Not nearly enough. They rode hard through the darkness, branches whipping at their faces, snow flying up from the horses' hooves. Clara could hear the pursuit behind them, shouts, hoofbeats, the crack of rifles firing blind into the night. Wade led them east, then south, then west, changing direction constantly, trying to lose their pursuers in the wilderness. But the men behind them knew this terrain, and they were gaining. Clara's horse stumbled, nearly throwing her. She managed to stay in the saddle but lost precious seconds. Wade circled back. "Keep moving," Clara shouted. "Not without you." A bullet hissed past Clara's head. Wade fired back toward the pursuers, one-handed, barely aiming. Then they were moving again, crashing through underbrush, the forest a blur of darkness and terror. Clara didn't know how long they rode. Time lost meaning. There was only movement and fear and the thunder of hooves and the certainty that they were about to die. Then Wade pulled up hard, his horse skidding to a halt. Clara stopped beside him, gasping. They were at the edge of a ravine, a deep gash in the earth, maybe 50 feet across, with a frozen creek at the bottom. No way across. The pursuit was seconds behind them. Wade looked at Clara, face grim. "We jump." "That's insane. We jump or we die here." Clara looked at the ravine, at the drop, at the ice below. They'd probably break their necks. But probably was better than definitely. She nodded. Wade spurred his horse. The animal leaped. For a moment they hung suspended in the darkness, nothing but air and terror. Then they hit the far side, the horse's hooves scrambling for purchase on the snow-covered slope. They made it. Barely. Clara didn't hesitate. She kicked her horse into a run and jumped. The world spun. Her horse landed hard, front legs buckling. Clara was thrown. She hit the ground, rolled, felt something crack in her ribs. Pain exploded through her chest. Wade was beside her instantly, pulling her up. "Can you ride?" Clara nodded, teeth gritted against the agony. Behind them, Hale's men had reached the ravine edge, but their horses refused to jump. Too wide, too dangerous. The men shouted in frustration, firing across the gap, but Clara and Wade were already moving, disappearing into the trees. They'd escaped, for now. They rode for another hour before Wade finally stopped in a dense grove of pines. Both horses were exhausted, sides heaving. Clara dismounted and immediately collapsed, ribs screaming. Wade knelt beside her. "Let me see." Clara pulled up her shirt. A massive bruise was already forming across her left side, purple and black. Wade pressed gently. Clara hissed in pain. "Cracked, not broken," Wade said. "You'll live, but it's going to hurt like hell for weeks." Clara laughed, then regretted it as pain lanced through her chest. "Worth it," she gasped. Wade pulled the ledger from his coat. Even in the dim light, Clara could see the triumph in his eyes. "We got it. Proof of everything Hale's been doing." Clara stared at the book. They'd survived. Against impossible odds, they'd infiltrated Hale's headquarters, stolen evidence of his crimes, and escaped. But looking at Wade's exhausted face, at her own blood-stained clothes, at the wilderness stretching endless around them, Clara realized something. This wasn't victory. This was just the beginning of a much longer war. They rested for 2 hours, then continued south toward Blackstone Ridge. Clara's ribs hurt with every breath, every step the horse took, but she stayed upright through sheer stubbornness. Wade kept glancing at her, concern flickering in his eyes. "We can stop," he said. "No." Clara said, "I said no. We stop, they catch us. We keep moving." Wade didn't argue. They reached the outskirts of Blackstone Ridge just after dawn. The town looked the same as always, a collection of weathered buildings, dirt streets, people moving through their morning routines like the world wasn't burning down around them. Wade and Clara rode straight to the sheriff's office. The sheriff was a man named Dalton, 50 years old, with a gut that said he spent more time at the saloon than enforcing laws. He looked up from his breakfast when they entered, eyes widening. "What in hell happened to you two?" Wade slammed the ledger onto Dalton's desk. Evidence of land fraud, falsified debts, and hired violence, all tied to Victor Hale. Dalton stared at the book like it was a snake. "Where'd you get this?" "Hale's office." Dalton's face went pale. "You broke into Victor Hale's ranch?" "Read the book," Clara said, leaning heavily on the desk. It's all there. Every illegal land grab, every forged document, every family he forced out through intimidation. Dalton opened the ledger slowly. His expression changed as he read. Surprise, then alarm, then something that looked like fear. He closed the book. "This doesn't prove anything." Clara's blood went cold. "What?" "These are just numbers and names. Could be legitimate transactions." Wade's voice dropped dangerously low. "You know they're not." Dalton stood, pushing the ledger back across the desk. "What I know is that Victor Hale is a respected businessman, and what you two just did, breaking and entering, theft, probably murder given the way you look, that's criminal activity." Clara couldn't believe what she was hearing. "He's paying you." Dalton's face hardened. "I'm going to pretend you didn't say that. Now get out of my office before I arrest you both." Wade moved so fast, Clara barely saw it. He grabbed Dalton by the front of his shirt and slammed him against the wall. "How much is he paying you?" Wade snarled. Dalton's hand went to his gun. Wade was faster. He had his own revolver pressed under Dalton's chin before the sheriff could clear leather. "Don't," Wade said quietly. Dalton froze. The office went silent except for the sound of Dalton's panicked breathing. Clara moved to the door, locked it, pulled the curtains closed. Wade didn't take his eyes off Dalton. "I'm going to ask you one more time. How much is Hale paying you?" Dalton swallowed hard. $50 a month. To look the other way. "And the judge?" "100. Wade released Dalton, disgust written across his face. "You sold out your entire town for $50. Dalton straightened his shirt, trying to recover some dignity. "You don't understand how things work out here. Hale owns half the territory. The railroad's coming. The people who stand with him will prosper. The people who stand against him will disappear." "Then I guess we're disappearing," Clara said coldly. She grabbed the ledger and turned toward the door. Wade followed. Dalton called after them. "You're dead, both of you. Hale will hunt you down, and when he does, nobody's going to help you." Clara stopped at the door. She looked back at Dalton, this coward who wore a badge and betrayed everyone who trusted him. "Then we'll die knowing we tried to do the right thing. That's more than you'll ever be able to say." They left him standing in his office, shame and fear warring on his face. Outside, the morning sun was bright and cold. Clara and Wade stood on the street, battered and exhausted and hunted. "What now?" Clara asked. Wade looked at her. "Now we make sure everyone knows what Hale's been doing. Sheriff won't help, so we go around him." "How?" Wade's mouth curved into a grim smile. "We go to the people Hale hurt. Show them they're not alone. Give them a reason to fight back." Clara thought about all the families who'd sold their land and fled, about the settlers who'd given up because they thought resistance was impossible, about her own 16 months of isolation and despair. Maybe Wade was right. Maybe what people needed wasn't a sheriff or a judge or some distant authority. Maybe they just needed to see someone stand up and refuse to be broken. Clara looked down at the ledger in her hands. Proof of crimes, evidence of corruption, a weapon. She met Wade's eyes. "Then let's give them a war." They started with the Carver family, who ran a small trading post on the eastern edge of town. Thomas Carver answered the door with a shotgun in his hands, suspicion etched deep in his weathered face. He was maybe 60, with shoulders bent from a lifetime of hard work and eyes that had seen too much disappointment. "We're not buying anything, and we're not selling," he said, before Wade or Clara could speak. "We're not here for that," Clara said. "We need to talk to you about Victor Hale." Carver's expression darkened. "Got nothing to say about him." He started to close the door. Wade put his boot in the jamb. "He's been stealing from you, from everyone in this valley. We have proof." Carver stared at them through the gap in the door. "Proof doesn't mean anything out here. Only thing that matters is who's got more guns." "That's why we're here," Clara said, "to change that." Something flickered in Carver's eyes. Not hope exactly, but maybe the memory of what hope used to feel like. He opened the door wider. 5 minutes. Then you leave." They sat at a scarred wooden table while Carver's wife Mary brought coffee with trembling hands. She was thin, worn down, the kind of exhaustion that came from years of barely surviving. Wade spread the ledger open. "Hale's been documenting everything, every property he's acquired, every debt he's fabricated, every family he's forced out. It's all here." Carver leaned forward, squinting at the pages. His finger traced down a column of numbers. "That's the Henderson place. And the Mitchells. And," his voice caught, "that's my brother's ranch. William sold 6 months ago. Said he had debts he couldn't pay." "Did he?" Clara asked gently. Carver's jaw clenched. "William never borrowed a cent in his life. He was too proud. But Hale's men came with papers saying he owed $1,200 to the Territorial Bank. The same bank Hale sits on the board of," Wade said. Carver looked up, fury burning in his eyes. "They stole my brother's land." "They stole everyone's land," Clara said, "and they'll keep stealing until someone stops them." Mary spoke for the first time, her voice barely above a whisper. "How do you stop a man like that?" Clara met her eyes. "You make people understand they're not alone. That if everyone Hale has hurt stands together, he can't destroy all of us at once." Carver laughed bitterly. You're talking about organizing settlers. Good luck with that. Half the people in this valley are so scared they won't even say Hale's name out loud. Fear works until it doesn't, Wade said. Hale's built his power on everyone believing they're isolated. Once people see they're not, that belief starts to crack. Carver studied Wade's face. You're Mercer. Own that big spread up north. Wade nodded. So why do you care what happens to homesteaders? Wade's expression went dark. Because I've seen what men like Hale do. They take and take until there's nothing left, and they sleep fine at night because they convince themselves it's just business. He leaned forward. I'm tired of watching it happen, and I'm guessing you are too. Carver was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, What do you need from me? Relief flooded through Clara. Names, she said. Everyone in this valley who's been hurt by Hale. Everyone who's still here, still fighting. We need to reach them before Hale realizes what we're doing. Mary disappeared into a back room and returned with a sheet of paper and a pencil. She started writing. By the time they left the Carver place an hour later, they had a list of 18 families. It wasn't many, but it was a start. Over the next 3 days, Clara and Wade moved through the valley like ghosts, visiting homesteads and ranches, showing the ledger, telling their story. Some doors slammed in their faces. Others opened slowly, suspicious but desperate. The Ramirez family had lost their water rights to a legal maneuver they didn't understand. Michael Brennan's cattle had died from poisoned grass. Accident, according to the sheriff, but the timing was suspicious. The widow Patterson had been pressured to sell after her barn mysteriously caught fire. Everyone had a story, and every story ended the same way, with Hale winning and good people losing everything. But something was changing. Clara could feel it in the way people listened, in the questions they asked, in the anger that started replacing fear in their eyes. On the fourth night, they gathered at the Carver trading post. 23 people crowded into a space meant for 12. Settlers, ranch hands, shopkeepers, families who'd been broken but not destroyed. Clara stood at the front of the room, Wade beside her, and felt the weight of 24 pairs of eyes. She'd never spoken to a crowd before, never tried to convince people to risk their lives. But looking at these faces, weathered and desperate and tired of being afraid, she found words she didn't know she had. Most of you know me as the Whitmore widow, the woman who lost her husband and spent the last year and a half failing to survive alone. Murmurs of recognition. Clara continued, Victor Hale came to my property 3 weeks ago, offered me $300 for land worth 10 times that. When I refused, he tried to burn me out, tried to kill me. Would have succeeded if Wade Mercer hadn't been there. She gestured to Wade. We broke into Hale's ranch and stole this. She held up the ledger. Every crime he's committed is documented in here. Every family he's destroyed, every debt he's forged, every piece of land he's stolen. It's all written down in his own hand. A man in the back spoke up. So take it to the territorial judge. The judge is on Hale's payroll, Wade said flatly. So is the sheriff. So are half the men who are supposed to enforce the law in this valley. Angry muttering spread through the room. Thomas Carver stood. So what are we supposed to do? Fight him? We're farmers and shopkeepers. Hale's got 20 hired guns and enough money to hire 20 more. You're right, Clara said. If we fight him individually, we lose. He picks us off one by one until there's nobody left. She looked around the room. But if we fight him together, if every person he's hurt stands up at the same time, we become too big to ignore, too expensive to destroy. You're talking about a militia, someone said. I'm talking about defense, Clara corrected. Hale's been operating in the shadows, using intimidation and violence because he knows nobody will fight back. Once we shine light on what he's doing, once we prove we're willing to defend ourselves, he loses his advantage. A woman Clara didn't recognize spoke from near the door. My husband died fighting back against a land baron in Colorado. They burned our ranch with him inside it. That's what happens when you resist powerful men. The room went quiet. Clara felt the hope she'd been building start to collapse. Then Wade spoke. I lost my brother the same way. Raiders killed him while I was gone. I spent 3 years telling myself that fighting back would just get more people killed. He paused. But I was wrong. Not fighting back is what gets people killed. Letting men like Hale operate without consequences is what destroys communities. Your husband died fighting. which means he died free. That's more than most people get. The woman's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded slowly. Wade turned to address the whole room. I'm not going to lie to you. If we do this, some of us might die. Hale's not going to surrender his empire just because we ask nicely. There will be violence, there will be blood. He let that sink in. But here's what I know. If we don't fight, we die anyway. Slowly, piece by piece, as Hale takes everything we've built and leaves us with nothing. At least if we fight, we die on our feet. Silence. Then Michael Brennan stood. I'm in. The widow Patterson stood. Me too. One by one, people rose. Not everyone. 3 families left, fear winning over anger. But 18 stayed. 18 people willing to risk everything for a chance at justice. Clara felt something tight in her chest loosen for the first time in months. They weren't alone anymore. The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of hammering. She'd been sleeping in the Carver's back room, ribs still aching from the fall during their escape from Hale's ranch. Moving hurt, breathing hurt, but she forced herself upright and went to investigate the noise. Outside, the valley was transforming. Settlers who'd spent months avoiding each other were suddenly working together, reinforcing fences, sharing supplies, organizing watches. Someone had set up a makeshift command center in the trading post, mapping out every homestead and ranch that needed defending. Wade was in the middle of it all, directing people with calm authority. He saw Clara and waved her over. We've got a problem. Clara's stomach sank. What kind of problem? Wade gestured to the map spread across a table. Most of these properties are too spread out to defend effectively. If Hale attacks multiple locations at once, we won't be able to respond fast enough. Clara studied the map. He was right. The homesteads dotted the valley in a loose sprawl, miles between some of them. What if we consolidate? She said. Wade looked at her. What do you mean? Clara traced a circle on the map around the Carver trading post and 3 nearby ranches. These properties are close together, maybe half a mile between each one. If we moved everyone here temporarily, brought supplies, livestock, whatever can be moved, we create a central defensive position. One place Hale has to attack if he wants to break us. Wade's eyes lit up. That could work. It concentrates our numbers, makes it easier to coordinate, and it sends a message that we're serious. It also abandons properties, Thomas Carver said, joining the conversation. People leave their homesteads. Hale's men could burn everything while we're not there. They could, Clara agreed. But they're probably going to do that anyway. At least this way we're all together when it happens. Carver chewed on that for a moment. Then he nodded. All right, let's do it. The evacuation took 2 days. Families loaded wagons with whatever they couldn't afford to lose: tools, food, weapons, personal belongings. Livestock was herded to Carver's property, where hastily built corrals held cattle, horses, pigs, chickens, all jumbled together. It was chaos. People argued about sleeping arrangements, about food rationing, about whose livestock got priority space. Tempers flared. Fights broke out. Clara found herself mediating disputes she had no business settling. I don't care whose cow that is, she snapped at 2 men shouting at each other near the water trough. Figure it out, or I'll shoot the damn thing, and we'll all eat beef tonight. The men stared at her, shocked. Then one of them laughed. Yes, ma'am. They wandered off, still bickering but quieter. Wade appeared beside Clara. You're good at this. Clara wiped sweat from her forehead. Good at what? Threatening livestock? Leadership. Clara snorted. I'm barely holding it together. That's what leadership looks like, Wade said. Nobody's got it all figured out. You just keep moving forward and hope people follow. Clara looked at the organized chaos surrounding them. Families building lean-tos, men digging trenches, women organizing food supplies. They're following because you gave them hope, she said quietly. We gave them hope, Wade corrected. This doesn't work without you. Clara felt heat rise in her face. Before she could respond, someone shouted from the eastern perimeter. Riders coming! Everyone froze. Wade grabbed his rifle and moved toward the lookout position. Clara followed, hand on her revolver. 3 riders approached slowly, hands visible, no weapons drawn. Not Hale's men. Clara squinted. She recognized the one in front, Marcus Webb, who ran a small ranch on the far western edge of the valley. She'd visited him 4 days ago, showed him the ledger, and he'd refused to get involved, said it was suicide. The riders stopped 20 yards out. Webb dismounted, hands still raised. "We're not here to fight." "Then why are you here?" Wade called. Webb gestured to the men with him. "Hale's men hit the Rodriguez place last night, burned the house, scattered the livestock. Miguel and his family barely got out alive." Clara's blood ran cold. "Where are they now?" "Headed to his brother's place in Colorado. He's done fighting." Webb stepped closer. "But I'm not. I watched Hale destroy a good man's life because I was too scared to help. I'm not making that mistake again." He looked around at the assembled settlers. "You're building something here, something that might actually stand a chance. If the offer's still open, I'd like to be part of it." Wade glanced at Clara. She nodded. "Welcome to the fight," Wade said. Webb and his men joined the camp, bringing with them news that spread like wildfire. Hale had escalated. He wasn't negotiating anymore. He was burning people out, terrorizing families, making examples of anyone who resisted. The mood in the camp shifted. Fear crept back in, whispering that resistance was pointless. Clara felt it in the way people avoided eye contact, in the quiet conversations that stopped when she walked by. That night, she sat outside the trading post, staring at the stars, wondering if they'd made a terrible mistake. Wade found her there. He sat down without asking, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Thinking about running?" he asked. "Thinking about what happens if we lose." Wade was quiet for a moment. "We might lose," he admitted. "Hale's got resources we don't, experience we don't. He could crush us." "That's not comforting," Wade smiled slightly. "Wasn't trying to be comforting, just honest." Clara pulled her coat tighter against the cold. "Owen used to say that hope was a choice, that you had to decide every morning whether you believed things could get better." "Smart man." "I don't know if I can make that choice anymore," Clara whispered. "I'm so tired, Wade. Tired of fighting, tired of being afraid, tired of watching everything fall apart." Wade turned to look at her. "Then don't fight alone." Clara met his eyes. "I'm not alone. I've got 18 families depending on me not to get them killed." "That's not what I meant." Wade reached over and took her hand. Clara's breath caught. "I meant you don't have to carry all of this by yourself," Wade said quietly. "Whatever happens next, we face it together. You and me." Clara stared at their joined hands, her scarred fingers intertwined with his, both of them marked by violence and survival. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you care so much about what happens to me?" Wade's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "Because somewhere between that blizzard and this moment, you stopped being a stranger I was helping and became someone I can't imagine losing." Clara's throat tightened. She thought about Owen, about the guilt of moving forward, about whether she had the right to feel something for someone else. "I'm not ready," she whispered. "I know," Wade said. "I'm not asking you to be." He squeezed her hand once, then released it. "I'm just asking you to know that you're not alone. Whatever you decide, whenever you decide it, I'm here." He stood and walked back toward the trading post, leaving Clara sitting in the darkness with her heart doing complicated things in her chest. The attack came 2 days later, at dawn when the camp was just waking up. 12 riders burst over the eastern ridge, firing rifles, throwing torches, screaming like demons. Chaos erupted. People scattered, grabbing weapons, shouting for children, trying to organize defense while half awake and terrified. Clara was in the trading post when the first shots rang out. She grabbed her rifle and ran outside, ribs screaming in protest. Wade was already at the eastern barricade returning fire. "Get everyone to the center," he shouted. "Don't let them scatter us." Clara ran through the camp, herding panicked families toward the trading post. Inside, everyone inside. Women grabbed children, men grabbed weapons. Everyone moved in a confused mass toward the center of the camp. The riders circled, firing constantly, trying to create enough chaos to break the defense. One torch landed on a tent. Flames erupted. Another torch hit a wagon filled with hay. More fire. Clara aimed at one of the riders and fired. Missed. Fired again. The rider jerked backward but stayed in the saddle. Wade shot another rider's horse out from under him. The man went down hard, screaming. For 10 minutes, it was hell on earth, gunfire, screaming, smoke, the smell of burning canvas and hair and fear. Then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, the riders retreated. They galloped back over the ridge and disappeared. Silence fell. Clara stood panting, rifle trembling in her hands, ears ringing from the gunfire. Wade appeared beside her. Anyone hurt? Someone shouted from near the wagons. Thomas is hit! They ran. Thomas Carver was on the ground, blood spreading across his shirt from a wound in his shoulder. His wife Mary was beside him, pressing cloth against the wound, face pale with terror. Wade knelt down. Let me see. He examined the wound quickly. Bullet went through. He'll live if we keep it clean. Mary sobbed in relief. Clara looked around at the burning tents, the scattered supplies, the faces of people who'd just survived their first real battle. 3 children were crying. 2 women were praying. Every man was checking his weapon, preparing for another attack. Marcus Webb appeared, smoke-stained and wild-eyed. That was just a probe. They were testing us, seeing how we'd respond. The real attack is coming. When? Clara asked. Webb looked toward the eastern ridge where the riders had disappeared. Soon. Maybe today, maybe tonight. But soon. Clara's mind raced. They'd survived this attack through luck and confusion more than skill. A coordinated assault would overwhelm them. We need more people, she said. Wade shook his head. We've already reached everyone willing to fight. There's nobody left. Clara thought about the families who'd left the meeting, the ones too scared to resist. What if we're asking the wrong people? Wade looked at her. What do you mean? Clara's pulse quickened as an idea formed. Hale's men, the hired guns doing his dirty work. They're not loyal to him. They're loyal to money. What if we offer them more? Wade stared at her. You want to bribe Hale's own men to switch sides? I want to show them there's a better option than dying for someone who sees them as disposable. Wade considered this. It's risky. Could backfire completely. Everything we're doing is risky, Clara pointed out. Wade's mouth curved into a grim smile. Fair point. He turned to Marcus Webb. You know any of Hale's men personally? Webb nodded slowly. Few of them. Most are just drifters looking for work. They'll gun for whoever pays best. Then let's make them an offer, Clara said. They spent the rest of the day preparing. Wade and Marcus rode to the edge of Hale's territory and left a message with a ranch hand they knew. A meeting request, neutral ground, just to talk. Clara didn't expect it to work, but that night, 3 men appeared at the camp perimeter. Hard-faced men with guns and scars and the look of people who'd killed before and would kill again. Clara met them outside the barricade, Wade beside her. The leader was a man named Cutter, tall, thin, with a knife scar running from his eye to his jaw. You got guts. I'll give you that, Cutter said. Inviting men who were shooting at you this morning to sit down for a chat. We're not here to chat, Clara said. We're here to make you an offer. Cutter's eyes narrowed. I'm listening. Wade stepped forward. Hale's paying you what? $30 a month plus room and board? 40, Cutter corrected. We'll pay you 60, plus a cut of whatever we recover from Hale's seized properties once this is over. Cutter laughed. That's assuming you win, which you won't. Hale's got 3 times your numbers and 10 times your resources. Hale's got men who are fighting for money, Clara said. We've got people fighting for their homes, their families, their lives. That makes us dangerous in ways Hale can't match. She met Cutter's eyes. You've been doing this long enough to know how these fights end. The powerful man always wins, right up until he doesn't. And when Hale falls, and he will fall, anyone standing beside him goes down too. Cutter studied her face. You really believe that? I believe that Victor Hale has made a lot of enemies, and eventually they all come looking for payback. Cutter was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I want 100. 80, Wade countered, plus the property split. 90. Deal. They shook hands. Clara felt something between relief and disbelief. It had actually worked. Cutter gestured to the men with him. We'll bring 5 more. Men I trust. That gives you 8 extra guns. When? Wade asked. Tomorrow night. After Hale's next attack fails. He'll be angry, disorganized. That's when you hit him. Clara's pulse quickened. Hit him how? Cutter smiled, cold and predatory. His ranch. While he's here attacking you, his headquarters will be vulnerable. You burn it to the ground, you cut the head off the snake. Wade and Clara exchanged glances. It was insane. It was also the only real chance they had. Tomorrow night, then, Wade said. Cutter and his men disappeared into the darkness. Clara stood staring after them. We just made a deal with hired killers. Desperate times, Wade said. Clara laughed, bitter and exhausted. Owen would say we've lost our minds. Have we? Clara thought about it. Probably. But I don't see another option. Wade put his hand on her shoulder. Then tomorrow we find out if we're brave or just stupid. Clara covered his hand with hers. Either way, we find out together. They walked back to camp where 18 families slept restlessly, trusting 2 broken people to somehow save them all from a man who owned half the territory. Clara didn't sleep that night. She sat up watching the eastern ridge, waiting for dawn, wondering if she'd live to see another sunset. And somewhere in the darkness, Victor Hale's empire was preparing to crush them. The final battle was coming, and nothing would ever be the same again. The second attack came just after noon the next day, exactly when Cutter said it would. This time, Victor Hale himself led the charge. 25 riders swept down from the north ridge like an avalanche, firing before they were even in effective range, trying to overwhelm the camp through sheer violence and numbers. Clara was ready. She'd positioned defenders at every approach, created overlapping fields of fire, stockpiled ammunition at strategic points. When the first shots rang out, everyone knew exactly where to go and what to do. The battle was nothing like the movies made it seem. There was no glory in it, no heroic moments where time slowed down and music swelled. Just noise and terror and the sick feeling of aiming at another human being and pulling the trigger. Clara fired from behind an overturned wagon, her cracked ribs screaming with every recoil. Beside her, Mary Carver reloaded rifles with shaking hands, passing them to shooters faster than Clara thought possible for someone who'd never touched a gun before last week. Wade commanded the eastern position, his voice cutting through the chaos. Hold your fire until they're in range. Don't waste ammunition. The settlers were outnumbered nearly 2-1, but they had something Hale's men didn't. They were fighting for survival, not a paycheck. That desperation made them dangerous. Michael Brennan took down 2 riders with a hunting rifle he'd used to shoot elk. The widow Patterson threw burning pitch at a man trying to set fire to the trading post, catching him full in the chest. Marcus Webb fought like a demon, reloading and firing with mechanical precision. But Hale's men kept coming. They pushed forward using superior numbers to flank the defenders, get closer to the barricades. Clara saw one rider break through the eastern line and ride straight toward the cluster of women and children huddled behind the trading post. She didn't think, just ran. Her ribs felt like they were tearing apart with every step, but she sprinted across the open ground and tackled the rider as he dismounted. They went down hard. The man was bigger, stronger, trained for this kind of fighting. He got on top of her, hands reaching for her throat. Clara drove her knee into his groin. He grunted, grip loosening. She grabbed a rock and smashed it into his temple. Once, twice, 3 times until he stopped moving. Clara rolled off him, gasping, covered in blood. His or hers, she couldn't tell. Wade appeared, pulling her to her feet. You all right? Clara nodded, unable to speak. The battle raged for another 20 minutes before Hale's men finally retreated, leaving 4 bodies behind and taking their wounded with them. The camp fell silent, except for moaning from the injured and crying from traumatized children. Clara surveyed the damage. 2 settlers dead, a young ranch hand named Peter, an old man Wilson who'd survived 40 years on the frontier only to die defending someone else's property. 7 wounded, including Thomas Carver, who'd taken another bullet, this time in the leg. The trading post was riddled with bullet holes. 2 wagons were destroyed. Most of their food supplies were ruined by fire or gunfire, but they'd held. Against overwhelming odds, they'd driven Victor Hale back. Wade gathered the defenders in the center of camp. Tonight, he said simply. Everyone understood. While Hale regrouped, while his men licked their wounds and prepared for another assault, Clara and Wade would strike at his headquarters. It was madness, but it was also their only chance. As darkness fell, Clara found herself checking her weapons for the 3rd time, hands shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline. Mary Carver appeared beside her. You don't have to do this, Mary said quietly. Wade could go without you. Clara looked at the older woman. I'm not sending him alone, even if it gets you killed? Especially then. Mary was quiet for a moment. You love him. It wasn't a question. Clara's throat tightened. I don't know, maybe. It's too soon. Owen's only been gone. Owen's been gone for over a year, Mary interrupted gently. And he'd want you to keep living, really living, not just surviving. Clara felt tears burn behind her eyes. How do you know what he'd want? Mary smiled sadly. Because my first husband died 20 years ago. Cholera. Left me with 2 babies and a failing farm. I thought my life was over. She gestured toward Thomas, who was sleeping fitfully nearby despite his injuries. Then Thomas showed up, offering to help with the harvest. I fought it for 2 years before I finally admitted I cared about him. And you know what I learned? Clara shook her head. Grief doesn't have a timeline. You don't stop missing the people you lost, but you don't honor their memory by refusing to be happy. You honor it by living the kind of life they'd want for you. Clara wiped at her eyes. What if I don't deserve to be happy? What if I get Wade killed because I'm too weak or too scared or too... Mary gripped her shoulders. Clara Whitmore, you are the strongest woman I've ever met. You've survived things that would have destroyed most people. You've led us when we had no one else to follow. Whatever happens tonight, it won't be because you weren't enough. Clara pulled Mary into a fierce hug. Thank you, she whispered. Mary squeezed back. Come back alive, both of you. Clara pulled away and nodded. We'll try. They left just after midnight. Clara, Wade, and 8 of Cutter's hired guns, moving on horseback through the darkness toward Hale's ranch. The night was clear and cold, stars scattered across the sky like broken glass. Clara's breath steamed in the frozen air. Her ribs ached with every movement, but she pushed the pain down, buried it under layers of determination and rage. Cutter rode beside Wade at the front of the group. Hale keeps most of his men at the ranch, Cutter said quietly. But after today's attack, he'll have pulled even more for tomorrow's assault. My guess is maybe 10 guards left behind. Still bad odds, Wade said. Cutter shrugged. Odds are always bad. That's why we get paid. They rode in silence after that. Clara found herself thinking about Owen, about the day he'd ridden into the mountains and never come back. She'd spent 16 months wondering what his last moments were like, whether he'd been afraid, whether he'd thought about her, whether death came quick or slow. Now, riding toward almost certain violence, she understood something she hadn't before. Owen had been scared. Of course he had. Every person facing death was scared. But he'd ridden out anyway because the cattle needed to be found and the work needed to be done, and sometimes survival meant doing terrifying things. That was the frontier, not the romanticized version people back east imagined, full of noble cowboys and manifest destiny. The real frontier, where you did what had to be done even when your hands shook and your stomach churned and every instinct screamed to run. Clara straightened in her saddle. She wasn't going to run. Hale's ranch appeared just before 2 in the morning, sprawling and dark except for a few lanterns burning near the guard posts. They left the horses a quarter-mile out and approached on foot. Cutter moved like a ghost, signaling positions with hand gestures his men understood instantly. This was their world, violence in the darkness, killing for money, no questions asked. Clara and Wade followed their lead. They split into 2 groups. Cutter and 4 men would hit the bunkhouse, neutralize the guards. Clara, Wade, and the remaining 3 would hit the main house and office, looking for Hale's records and anything else that could be used as evidence. The bunkhouse went first. Clara watched from the shadows as Cutter's team moved with brutal efficiency. 3 shots, muffled by the wind, and then silence. No alarms, no shouts, just professionals doing terrible work. Wade gripped Clara's arm. Ready? She nodded. They moved. The office was unlocked. Arrogant or careless, Clara didn't know and didn't care. They slipped inside, Wade lighting a small lantern while Clara kept watch at the door. The office was exactly as Clara remembered from their first raid. Filing cabinets, desks, stacks of paperwork documenting Hale's empire. Wade grabbed everything he could carry. Ledgers, contracts, correspondence, financial records. We'll sort through it later, he whispered. Right now we just take everything. They stuffed papers into canvas bags, working fast, knowing every second increased their chances of discovery. Clara was pulling open another drawer when she heard footsteps outside. She froze. Wade killed the lantern instantly. The door opened. A man stepped inside, silhouetted against the moonlight. Not a guard. Victor Hale himself. He saw them immediately. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Hale laughed, a cold, bitter sound. The widow and the rancher, breaking into my property again. You people really don't learn, do you? Wade raised his rifle. Step back. Hale ignored him, moving further into the room. You think stealing papers will change anything? You think evidence matters out here? It matters when people see what you've done, Clara said. Hale's eyes shifted to her. You stupid woman. I've built this empire over 20 years. I own the sheriff, the judge, half the territorial legislature. Your little rebellion is nothing but an inconvenience. Then why are you here? Clara asked. If we're so insignificant, why aren't you with your men, crushing the settlers? Hale's expression darkened. Because I wanted to make sure there was nothing left for you to find. Wanted to burn these records myself before someone could misuse them. He pulled out a match. Wade fired. The shot went wide. Intentionally or not, Clara couldn't tell. Hale dove behind a desk. Chaos erupted. Gunfire exploded from outside, Cutter's men engaging with guards Clara hadn't known were there. Hale fired back at Wade from behind cover. Clara moved without thinking, circling around while Hale was focused on Wade. She got behind him, pressed her revolver against the back of his head. Drop it. Hale froze. Slowly, he set his gun on the floor. Wade came around the desk, rifle aimed at Hale's chest. Stand up. Hale stood, hands raised, but there was no fear in his eyes, just calculation. You won't kill me, he said confidently. You're not a killer, Mrs. Whitmore. You're a farmer's wife playing at war. Clara's finger tightened on the trigger. She thought about Owen, about her burned barn, about every family Hale had destroyed. It would be so easy. One bullet, justice. You're right, she said quietly. I'm not a killer. She lowered the gun. Hale smiled. Smart woman. Clara pistol whipped him across the face. Hale went down hard, blood pouring from his nose. But I'm not stupid either, Clara finished. Wade moved forward with rope, binding Hale's hands behind his back. Outside, the gunfire had stopped. Cutter appeared in the doorway, smoke-stained and breathing hard. We got them all, 8 guards down, 2 of mine wounded but alive. He saw Hale on the floor and grinned. Well, look at that, the big man himself. Wade hauled Hale to his feet. We're taking him back, him and all these records. Let everyone see exactly who Victor Hale is. They loaded everything onto horses, papers, ledgers, and one very angry land baron tied across a saddle like cargo. The ride back felt longer than the ride out. Dawn was breaking when they finally reached the settler camp. People emerged from the trading post, staring in disbelief at the bound figure of Victor Hale. Word spread fast. Within an hour, everyone in Blackstone Ridge knew that the widow Whitmore and Wade Mercer had done the impossible. They'd captured the most powerful man in the territory. The celebration was brief. They still had Hale's remaining men to deal with, still had a legal system that might not care about evidence, still had 100 problems that wouldn't disappear just because one man was in custody. But something had shifted. The myth of Victor Hale's invincibility was broken. And once people saw that, everything else became possible. Sheriff Dalton arrived 3 hours later with 6 deputies, clearly expecting to arrest Clara and Wade for kidnapping and assault. He stopped short when he saw the crowd gathered around the trading post. Not just settlers, but townspeople, ranch hands, shopkeepers, people who'd been silent for years suddenly finding their voices. Thomas Carver stepped forward, leg bandaged, leaning on a crutch. Sheriff, these people have evidence of criminal activity by Victor Hale. Land fraud, falsified debts, arson, murder. It's all documented. Dalton's face went pale. That's for a court to decide. Then take him to court, Clara said, pushing through the crowd. We'll testify. All of us. Every family he's hurt, every settler he's driven out. You can try to protect him, but there are too many witnesses now, too many people willing to speak. Dalton looked at the faces surrounding him. They weren't backing down. He'd spent years taking Hale's money, looking the other way while good people suffered. But even corrupt men had limits. I'll take him into custody, Dalton said finally. And the evidence. There'll be an investigation. It wasn't justice. Not yet. But it was a start. As the sheriff led Hale away in chains, the man who'd terrorized an entire valley for years, Clara felt something unfamiliar wash over her. Relief. Bone-deep, overwhelming relief. Wade appeared beside her. We did it. Clara nodded, too exhausted to speak. They stood together, watching the sun rise over the valley, over the land they'd fought so hard to defend. People started drifting away, heading back to their families, their homesteads, their lives. But they'd be back. That was the thing about community. Once people understood they were stronger together, they didn't forget. Clara and Wade stayed at the Carver place for another week while the wounded healed and the legal process ground forward. The territorial judge arrived, brought in by citizens demanding action. He was an older man named Hackett, with a reputation for honesty that even Hale's money couldn't corrupt. The trial happened fast by frontier standards, 2 weeks from arrest to conviction. Hale's lawyers tried everything, but the evidence was overwhelming. Forged documents, falsified debts, witness after witness describing violence and intimidation. When the verdict came down, guilty on 14 counts of fraud, 3 counts of conspiracy to commit murder, people poured into the streets celebrating like they'd won a war. In a way, they had. Victor Hale was sentenced to 20 years in the territorial prison. His assets were seized, his ranch broken up and sold to pay restitution to the families he'd harmed. It wasn't enough to undo the damage. Nothing could bring back the people who'd died or return the years stolen by fear. But it was something. Clara stood outside the courthouse, watching them load Hale into a prison wagon, and felt a chapter of her life close. Owen was gone. Her old homestead was destroyed. The woman she'd been when she first arrived in Wyoming territory had died somewhere along the way. But the woman who remained was stronger than she'd ever imagined she could be. Wade found her as the prison wagon rolled away. "What now?" he asked. Clara thought about it. "I don't know. I need to rebuild, figure out what comes next." Wade was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I've been thinking about selling my ranch." Clara looked at him sharply. "What? Why?" Wade shrugged. "It's too big. Too empty. I built it to prove something to myself, but I don't need to prove anything anymore." He turned to face her. "I was thinking about buying land here, in this valley, close to people who actually matter." Clara's heart did something complicated. "Wade, I'm not asking for anything," Wade interrupted. "I'm just saying I'd like to stay, be part of whatever this community becomes. And if you wanted help rebuilding your place, I'd like to be the one offering it." Clara stared at him. This man who'd knocked on her door during a blizzard and somehow become the most important person in her world. "I don't know what I want yet," she admitted. "I don't know if I can be what you need." Wade smiled. "I don't need you to be anything except yourself. Everything else we'll figure out together." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "That's terrifying." "I know. And probably a mistake. Probably," Clara laughed despite herself. Then she stepped forward and kissed him. It wasn't like the kisses in romance novels, desperate and passionate and perfect. It was awkward and uncertain, and tasted like coffee and hope. But it was real. When they pulled apart, Wade was grinning like an idiot. "So is that a yes?" "It's a maybe," Clara corrected. "Maybe we try this. Maybe we build something together. Maybe we fail spectacularly." "I can work with maybe." They walked through Blackstone Ridge together, past shops reopening, families rebuilding, a community slowly healing from years of fear. People waved, children played in the streets. Life continued, stubborn and resilient, the way it always did on the frontier. Clara realized something then. She'd spent so long thinking the frontier had tried to erase her, to grind her down into nothing. But that was backwards. The frontier hadn't erased her. It had revealed her. All the strength she didn't know she had, all the courage buried under grief, all the parts of herself she'd thought were lost. The frontier had burned away everything else until only the essential remained, and what remained was strong enough to survive anything. The next few months transformed the valley. With Hale gone and his empire dissolved, land became available. Families returned, bringing friends and relatives. New businesses opened. The railroad Hale had been speculating on actually arrived, but this time the profits went to the people who'd held on through the darkest times. Clara rebuilt her homestead with help from the entire community. Wade bought the adjacent property and built a smaller ranch. Nothing like the massive operation he'd left behind, but something more personal, more meaningful. They worked side by side, planting crops, raising cattle, building a life that honored both their pasts without being trapped by them. Thomas and Mary Carver's trading post became the heart of the community, part general store, part gathering place, where people met to share news and settle disputes and remember what they'd survived together. Some nights, Clara would sit on her rebuilt porch and think about Owen. The grief didn't disappear. It never would. But it transformed into something softer, more like memory than wound. She talked to him sometimes, told him about Wade, about the community, about the woman she'd become. She liked to think he'd be proud. A year after Hale's conviction, Clara and Wade got married in a ceremony that brought together nearly every settler in the valley. It wasn't fancy. They stood in front of the trading post, Wade in his best shirt, Clara in a simple dress Mary had helped her sew. The justice of the peace was old Judge Hackett, who'd presided over Hale's trial and stuck around to help rebuild the territory's legal system. When Hackett asked if Clara took Wade to be her husband, she looked at the man who'd shown up during a blizzard and refused to leave, who'd fought beside her when everyone else had given up, who'd seen her at her absolute worst and chosen to stay anyway. "I do," she said. And she meant it with every scarred, stubborn, surviving piece of herself. The reception lasted until dawn. People danced, ate, told stories, celebrated not just a wedding, but everything they'd overcome to get here. Clara found herself standing apart from the celebration at one point, just watching. Marcus Webb appeared beside her. "You did something remarkable, you know." Clara shook her head. "We all did it together." "No," Marcus insisted. "You gave us something to fight for. Without you, we'd have scattered, given up, let Hale win." Clara thought about that. "I didn't do anything special. I just refused to disappear." Marcus smiled. "That's exactly what made it special." He walked away, leaving Clara with that thought. She'd spent so long thinking she needed to be more, stronger, braver, smarter to survive the frontier. But maybe survival wasn't about being extraordinary. Maybe it was just about showing up every day, doing the work, refusing to let the world break you, even when breaking seemed inevitable. Maybe that was heroism. Not grand gestures or dramatic moments, but quiet persistence in the face of impossible odds. Wade found her as the sun started to rise. "You all right?" Clara leaned against him. "Yeah, just thinking." "About what?" Clara looked out at the valley, at the land she'd almost lost, at the community that had formed from desperation and determination. "About how far we've come. About everything we survived to get here." Wade wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "You think it was worth it?" Clara thought about Owen's grave somewhere in those mountains, about the homestead she'd almost abandoned, about all the moments she'd wanted to give up. "I think nothing worth having comes easy," she said finally, "and I think we earned this." They stood together, watching the sun paint the valley gold, surrounded by people who'd become family through shared struggle. The frontier hadn't gotten easier. It never would. There would still be harsh winters, failed crops, sickness, death, 100 daily struggles just to survive. But Clara had learned something through all of it. Strength wasn't about never falling. It was about getting back up every single time. Community wasn't just about living near other people. It was about choosing to fight for each other when fighting seemed pointless. And love, real love, wasn't about perfect moments or easy choices. It was about finding someone who saw all your broken pieces and decided they fit together beautifully. Years passed. The valley continued growing. Clara and Wade built a ranch that became known for fair dealing and quality cattle. They hired workers who needed second chances, paid them well, treated them with respect. They never got rich. But they built something better than wealth, a life with meaning, surrounded by people who mattered. Clara became known throughout the territory as the woman who'd stood against Victor Hale and won. People came from miles away just to hear the story, expecting to meet some larger-than-life figure. Instead, they found a woman in her 30s with work-roughened hands and gray starting in her hair, who talked about practical things like water rights and cattle breeding and the best way to survive a hard winter. She never told the story the way people wanted to hear it. No dramatic embellishments, no claims of fearlessness, no pretending it was easy. She told the truth, that she'd been terrified every single day, that she'd wanted to quit more times than she could count, that survival was messy and painful and nothing like the myths people told about frontier heroism. But she also told them that fear didn't mean weakness, that wanting to quit didn't mean you had to, that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when they had no other choice. And people listened, not because she was special, but because she was honest. On Clara's 40th birthday, Wade surprised her with something she never expected, a headstone. They rode out to the mountains together, to a spot where Owen's horse had been found all those years ago. The stone was simple. Owen Whitmore, Beloved husband, 1859 to 1887. The frontier claimed his life, but not his dream. Clara stood staring at it, tears streaming down her face. Wade had somehow understood that she needed this, needed closure, needed a place to remember, needed to honor what came before without being trapped by it. "Thank you," she whispered. Wade squeezed her hand. They stood there together, remembering the man who'd brought Clara to this wild place, who'd died too young, who'd never know what his widow had become. Then they rode home, to the life they'd built from ashes and stubbornness and love, to the community that had formed because people decided surviving together was better than dying alone, to the future that existed because they'd refused to let powerful men steal it. Clara Whitmore lived another 43 years. She saw the territory become a state, saw the railroad transform the valley, saw children she'd helped raise grow up and build their own homesteads. She and Wade never had children of their own. Whether by choice or chance, she never told anyone. But they poured their energy into the community, into helping other families survive and thrive. When Clara died in 1931 at the age of 83, surrounded by people who loved her, the valley she'd fought for had become one of the most prosperous regions in the state. Her funeral brought together 3 generations, people who remembered the Hale conflict, their children who'd heard the stories, and grandchildren growing up in a world their ancestors had bled to create. They buried her next to Wade, who'd died 2 years earlier. And if you asked anyone in that valley what made Clara Whitmore remarkable, they'd tell you it wasn't that she was fearless. It was that she was terrified and did it anyway. It wasn't that she never fell. It was that she got back up every single time. It wasn't that she was perfect. It was that she was human, flawed and scared and sometimes wrong, but determined to build something better than the world wanted to give her. The frontier tried to erase her. Instead, she carved her name into it so deep it could never be forgotten. And maybe that's the real lesson, that ordinary people in impossible situations can create extraordinary change, that community is stronger than corruption, that love is worth fighting for even when the fight seems hopeless, that the human spirit, when pushed to its absolute limit, doesn't break. It transforms. Clara Whitmore had arrived in Wyoming territory as a hopeful bride with dreams of an easy future. She became a widow who almost disappeared into grief. And then she became something else entirely, a leader, a fighter, a symbol of what happens when you refuse to let the world tell you who you're supposed to be. Her story didn't end with a perfect ending. There was no final triumph that solved everything. No moment where all the pain was worth it and everything made sense. Because that's not how life works. Not on the frontier, not anywhere. But there was survival. There was community. There was love. And sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything. The cabin Clara and Wade built still stands in that valley, preserved now as a historical landmark. Tourists visit, take pictures, read plaques about the woman who fought Victor Hale. They see the house, the land, the physical evidence of her existence. But they miss the real legacy. The real legacy is in the people who learned that ordinary courage matters. That standing up, even when you're terrified, even when you'll probably lose, even when no one else will stand with you, changes things. That one person refusing to be erased can inspire others to do the same. That's what Clara Whitmore left behind. Not a perfect story, a true one. And in the end, that made all the difference.